I've had the 981 GTS now about 2 years, and a few people actually asked me to do a review, so I figured it'd be I figured why not? Good time to do it. Beautiful weather, and I'm losing my voice, so I thought best idea is to just talk for a long time. I mean, the first thing really that I have to say is just the versatility of the car. Many people obviously know you can daily it. It's super practical. The front and the boot. I mean, it's an everyday car really. So that's been really the nice surprise of it. For me, it was my plan to have it as a sort of a weekend sports car, and its practicality and everyday use, I think, has been actually a bit of a blessing. But what's the best thing about it for me is the fact that it has really two faces to it. Some people might describe it as maybe a compromise between an affordable sports car and sort of a more dedicated, performance car. But I don't see it as a compromise. I see it actually as it takes a lot of the qualities from both ends. We can drive here very comfortably, quiet. The PDK calibration, I think, is fantastic. I never feel like it's not doing what I want and I have to intervene. And then with a simple press of the button, the sport button, you get a completely different car. I mean, it's just the character changes to such a degree. I haven't really experienced a car or motorcycle in that regard that changes so much. The tone of the exhaust, the aggressiveness of the overrun. I mean, the backfiring that you get. To me, it just really provides a lot of driving pleasure and emotion. And the throttle response. I mean, it changes completely. The throttle response is just and that's really been the most surprising thing for me. Now we're coming into a little village. I turn it off, quiet it down a bit, and I can cruise. And then once again, you can press and just enjoy. And that's been the biggest surprise for me. And I haven't heard many people talk about it, to be honest. So, the GT4 is probably on it all the time, and I think the GTS really hits that sweet spot. And I'm sure the S is actually very similar in this regard. The GTS only has 15 horsepower more, if you can even notice it. I don't know what other changes are there. I mean, obviously there's some aesthetic changes, and the basic trim level I think is slightly different, but really whatever you're going to feel in a GTS, I think you can get in an S as well. There's no, it's not that much of a differentiator in the end. Oh shit, that was a petrol station. Fuck. I never realized how much I would enjoy the note of the 6-cylinder, and I think the GTS has typically been praised for just how nice the quality of it is, and also the loudness. I mean, it does come through in the cabin quite a lot when the valves are open. The engine really, the 6-cylinder note in this engine it's slightly lower pitch, obviously, because of the lower RPM, and it's just probably not as aggressive as the GT4 with the 3.8, but nonetheless, the tune is really something that I've grown to love even more. Actually, I never realized that I would enjoy that 6 quite as much as I have. I was considering the 2.5 litre GTS with the turbo, and I'm really happy actually that I stuck it out and got the 6-cylinder, and I think the 981 it's a prettier car actually, so there is that. Let's talk about what spec I have in the car, because that obviously makes a difference really. This is obviously a PDK GTS. It also has the X73 suspension, which in my opinion is a perfect choice for a weekend sports car, because it's obviously slightly stiffer than the stock suspension, but I still find it quite comfortable. There's enough compliance and, you know, just a little bit amount of body roll, and I generally favor a slightly softer car, so it does a good job in that regard. And it sits about 20 millimeters lower than stock, so to me it's a win-win, and I would actually pick it over anything else. I specifically chose a PDK as my first Porsche, mainly because I wanted to experience it. Obviously everyone knows and has praised about the PDK, and I think that's pretty understood. But the biggest thing for me that I've noticed it as a street car, apart from the practicality, is the fact that with these shorter ratios of the 7-speed, you're playing with the gears, I mean, much more. I think with the 6-speed, with the longer ratios, you'd be stuck in a gear, I think, a little bit, you know, most of the time, and so I think you're going to be missing out on something, even though obviously the manual is much more engaging and those sort of things, but the ability to kind of go through gears more often, especially at the speeds that, you know, you have obviously on the street, I think makes it almost as inviting and involving really as a manual would be. So I'm really happy in that regard. The only minor comment that I will give is that in Sport Plus, I think the gear changes are just a little bit too aggressive. And not just for the street, I mean, when I've gone to the track with the car, I've also just typically stuck with Sport. The ignition cut in Sport Plus is so short that when the gear ratios change, I mean, you get all that, you get a massive thump from the inertia, from the engine. I'm sure it's a quicker gear change and everything, but I prefer the slight sort of discreetness almost of the Sport. So that's the only thing really. I mean, let me try Sport Plus here. It's just, wow. Minor thing. You know, it feels like if you change gear while going around, if you change gear in a corner, I get the feeling like you'd almost break traction. Now, I'm sure Porsche has calibration, is sensitive to the steering input and these sort of things, so that probably doesn't happen, but you just get that slight uneasiness of it, you know. Another big reason why I actually specifically wanted a GTS was because of the interior, really. With the GTS pack, you get, the Alcantara. This one also has red stitching and the carbon as well, which is an additional pack. But I was surprised actually how many GTSs were not optioned with the GTS interior. They had the standard black leather that you get in the S model as well. So it wasn't so easy actually to find one with this spec, but to me it makes all the difference. I mean, it's where you sit, it's where you spend most of the time in, it's where you're going to live in the car, and so to me that was actually more important than the aesthetics really. And in fact, when you're sitting in here, apart from the steering wheel and obviously that it's a PDK, it feels like a GT product. What are the things that I would improve in the car? I mean, there really isn't a lot. It is quite a complete package, but, well, the PDK shifter. whoever thought forward to upshift was a good idea, I have a lot of questions. That just doesn't make sense to me. But I mean, every performance car is the opposite, and racing car. So that is, if that is something I could change, I would. But it's a part of the calibration of the transmission control. There's no way to flip it in the shifter itself. I've checked. The way that the circuitry is designed in there, it just doesn't allow. It doesn't allow you to flip it. I thought it was going to be switches, or some sort of position sensor when the lever was to the left. But in reality, it's just one position sensor throughout the whole range. So when you actually press plus, you're actually moving it towards neutral. There's a little slot in between neutral, so you can't flip it easily without software. So
in the previous update video, I also pointed out the brakes as another weakness of the GTS. They can be overwhelmed on track or on aggressive mountain passes and will suffer from fading. While the pedal feel is usually firm and progressive, it can have minor inconsistencies.
The one downside, I will say, is that the traction control or stability control, you cannot fully disable it. If I'm not mistaken, it sort of keeps some of the stability control on, and I think the traction control is also still intervening, which, yeah. And I wasn't expecting in a Porsche that you wouldn't have that level of adjustability. I know the GT cars, you can actually turn it completely off, but I didn't expect a difference really between GT and non-GT in that regard. So what I will say though is that the traction control is calibrated, I think, quite well. It gives you a lot of confidence, and I'm also confident that it's going to intervene in questionable situations. So it's really just operating right above the threshold. The traction control is basically there to intervene. The flip side of that, of course, is that it's as soon as you want to play a little bit, it's going to stop you from doing that. It's going to say no pretty quickly. What else? The original 20-inch wheels, I think, are a little bit too big for this type of car. I think they fit really well on the GT4, but yeah, with the size of the brakes, I mean, I think these are 330 millimeters at the front. With a 20-inch, I mean, there's just so much gap. It's just not the biggest fan. The standard sport seats are obviously a bit of a downside for me. They're comfortable, but they have some of the lumbar support, but they don't have the leg support. I'm a tall guy, and my knees are constantly pressing on both sides. I'm braced both sides. The GTS, you could option it actually with the foldable buckets. That is definitely a better choice. I don't believe the 918 buckets were actually an option on the GTS. I think they were only in the GT4, the Club Sport. So yeah, I mean, really, that's all I can think of, really.
The 981 GTS has, in my opinion, aged incredibly well and remains an excellent everyday sports car even by today's standards. It provides supercar level of thrill and excitement at a reasonable cost.